You are watching Wide Field with Vivian Birchall. This is Wide Field.
Capital, human resources, business planning, marketing, public relations, sustainability. These are some of the cross-cutting issues in the business world. The same is true of public service and nonprofits. Entrepreneurs are constantly looking for ways to stay relevant and appeal to their target market. My guest today is Mr. Steve Grossman, who served as the 57th Treasurer and Receiver General of the state of Massachusetts from 2011 until 2015. He is currently the CEO of the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City, a Boston-based nonprofit focused on strengthening inner city economies. Through the Inner City Capital Connections, ICIC provides an executive leadership program designed to help business owners in economically distressed areas build capacity for sustainable growth in revenue, profitability, and employment through capacity building, education, one-on-one coaching, and connections to capital and capital providers. Mr. Grossman, welcome to Whitefield.
Thank you, Vivian. Nice to be back in the studio.
When was the last time you were in the studio?
Probably when I was running for governor back in 2014.
Before I get into the ICIC program, one of your principal achievements as treasurer for the state of Massachusetts was the creation of small business banking partnerships responsible for moving almost 400 million of state deposits into community banks that then use these funds to make more than 10,000 loans with a value of over 1.6 billion. What inspired you to create this partnership?
And actually, I'll tell you about the Small Business Banking Partnership,
Right.
but that's actually in many ways why I wound up as CEO of ICIC. But I'll take you back to the beginning. In my first week in office as state treasurer, because I am responsible as state treasurer for the state's cash, I said, where is our cash? Where does it sit?
Right.
And somebody says, well, it's in the Mass Municipal Depository Trust, a money market fund. I said, I know that, but where do they put the money? They came back a week later and they said, here's a list. And it turned out that 2/3 of the money, your money and our money, my money, everybody's money, was sitting in banks in Europe, Australia, and Asia.
Interesting.
Why? Because they got a little higher rate of return, a little higher interest rate. I said, wait a second. There needs to be a fundamental principle. This was 2011, right in the middle of the recession. Bad economic times, a lot of unemployment. I said there needs to be a fundamental principle. Massachusetts taxpayers' money should be in Massachusetts banks to be loaned to small businesses here in Massachusetts to create jobs for the people of Massachusetts. So I said, let's create a program to put money into banks that are willing to loan the money to small businesses. Common sense, right?
Right.
So I went to the Mass Bankers Association and to a number of other leaders, and I put a program together with the benefit of some advice, and we created the program. And we offered $5 and $10 million deposits to banks that were willing to take the money and do their best to loan the money to businesses owned by women, people of color, immigrants, veterans, and people with disabilities. State didn't make the loans. The banks made the loans. The state took no risk. I offered the money at the same interest rate that we were getting overseas. So the taxpayers did not underwrite a penny of the program, but it did put, over time, about $400 million into about 57 banks that made the loans that you talked about. And it created, I think, a lot of new jobs at a time when those jobs were necessary. So having created that program, when I was called by Dr. Michael Porter one day, and we got together to talk about my next chapter of my career, and he asked me to come on board as CEO of ICIC, the Initiative for Competitive Inner City, it was a natural outgrowth of what I had been doing for 4 years as treasurer, because ICIC is all about economic revitalization of underserved and under-resourced communities. So you can see the fit between what I did as treasurer and what I'm doing now.
And of course, the next question I would ask is, what prompted the creation of ICIC? You've mentioned Mr. Porter. Can you tell us a bit about Mr. Porter?
Dr. Porter's very well-known Harvard Business School professor. He may be the global guru of strategy and competitiveness. Many people would know the name Dr. Michael Porter. He was sitting in his office one day, and a student walked in, a student named Willie Woods. And Willie said, Dr. Porter, you know a lot about strategy. Do you know what happened in LA in the LA uprising in 1992? Do you know how many people died? Do you know how many violence was created? Dr. Porter, when are you going to turn your attention to America's inner cities, America's underserved communities? He said, Willie, that's a great idea. Let's do it together. So they studied the problem, and 6 months later they created ICIC, the Initiative for Competitive Inner City, to study the more than 300 cities in America that have high levels of poverty, high levels of unemployment. It has always been Dr. Porter's belief that the way you create economic growth and opportunity is to create healthy small businesses.
Right.
And if you can create ecosystems of small businesses in these underserved communities, many of them inner cities, you can create wealth. Look, I have heard all the discussion about climate change, and it's important that we address climate change and global warming. I believe the biggest problem that we face as a country, as a society, is the racial wealth gap. The fact that people who live in Roxbury and Dorchester and Mattapan have life expectancy 17 years less than right here in the town of Acton. And we need to create an opportunity to create wealth among business owners. And how do we help them do that? We give them education, coaching, capital, connections, networking, and contracts. And that's the fundamental basis on which we created what we call Inner City Capital Connections, which was started about 15 years ago with a grant from Bank of America, and that has helped over 4,000 small businesses all over the country get the tools they need to grow jobs, to grow revenue, to access capital, and to create better conditions in cities all over the United States.
It's interesting that you mentioned the racial gap, because I think it was yesterday, an article came up talking about the income inequality in the greater Boston area, where people are struggling with poverty. The community does not realize that people are poor. But the only way of finding out who people are poor is through the food pantries, people who manage those food pantries, because there's stigma that comes with poverty. People are not going to come out.
And that's why, even though we have a program called Inner City Capital Connections, we also have a number of other programs that serve business owners who are underserved themselves. Because we recognize that over the past 20 years, what's happened is something we call the suburbanization of poverty. There are a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet in communities all over Massachusetts, not simply in inner cities, not simply in inner city neighborhoods. It is happening all over the state. I was over at the Greater Boston Food Bank volunteering recently with all of my colleagues, and I learned that 1 in 7 Massachusetts residents has an issue with food, nutritious food. And if you're not getting nutritious food, you're not feeding your children properly, they don't learn as well. So the issue of suburbanization of poverty is something that affects almost every community we know of. Not every community, but a vast majority of communities. So we all have to be in this together to deal with these challenges. And what happens when you have food deserts or food or nutrition issues, when older adults, seniors, have to choose between food and their meds, paying their rent or taking meds, and the cost of prescription drugs is so high, those are choices you don't want any person to have to make.
In your opinion, do you think that is affecting businesses? Because if the people are poor, it means they don't have a disposable income to spend on restaurants and retail. And that's, what is your perspective on the relationship between poverty and the successful businesses in the inner cities?
Well, we want to create, again, what we call vibrant, sustainable small business ecosystems. If you have small businesses where the owners of the businesses have been taught strategy and marketing and team building and leadership, and good books and good finances, if they can run a successful business and grow the business and add employees, they make a profit. That profit is something they reinvest in the business, which creates more jobs. And we have an economy right now that a lot of people say is very much a full employment economy, but it's very uneven. There are a lot of people who have lost jobs that were paying $27 to $30 an hour. They now have jobs that are paying $15 an hour or less. So even though you may be counted as somebody with a job, if you're making half of what you used to make because the job was one that was eliminated, technology has had a huge impact on jobs. And for those people who have been trained for certain kinds of jobs, but those jobs went away, if they don't have the workforce training to be able to hold down another good paying job, that means their family income could be cut by 25, 30, or 40%. If you have a home, you have to pay your mortgage. If you have a car, you have to pay your car payment. Your expenses don't go away. But if your income drops significantly and you lose a job, then we need to do a much better job of workforce training. We have to invest much more in our community colleges and in our vocational technical schools, which I like to call career academies, to give people the tools they need to make that transition to a different kind of economy. And that's going to happen more and more as technology creates more dislocation.
So how do you select the businesses that join their ICIC programs?
So they're nominated by organizations, chambers of commerce, women's business organizations, community colleges that have continuing education for business people. So we have nominating partners, people who have their finger on the pulse of a community. And they know that a certain business owner could do better if she had the tools and the training, so they nominate a business to participate. People fill out a 10-minute application. Once they apply, we interview them all, and we ask them about their business. And while we're looking for businesses, we don't work with startups. We work with businesses that are beyond the proof of concept stage. They're in business, but they're struggling because they don't have a strategy or a marketing plan or an internet strategy. So we accept them into the plan, into the program, because they're ready to learn, ready to grow, ready to take that next step. And they spend time in one of our programs, the one called Inner City Capital Connections. We like to call it a 40-hour mini MBA on steroids. It's 40 hours of time that they spend. You ask a small business owner, you should participate in the program, and half the time they say, gee, I'd love to participate in this program, but I don't have the time. I'm so busy working in my business that I don't have time to work on my business. So we recruit businesses. We have put almost 500 businesses in Massachusetts through this program over the last 5 years. Those 465 businesses actually have grown significantly. They've created a little less than 1,500 jobs. They've accessed over $90 million of capital, debt and equity capital. So the goal is to create healthy, growing small businesses, mostly in underserved and under-resourced neighborhoods. But we have other programs that aren't necessarily just about inner city and that work with suburban or rural businesses. Because if you're in a suburban location or in a rural area or in a farming community in Western Mass, you may just be as underserved as a business in the inner city. And so we look for businesses that can grow, that need a growth plan, that can grow dramatically with the benefit of education, capital, and training, and we try to help them get to the next level of their business growth and opportunity.
So what are some of those other programs that are not in the City Capital Connections?
One of them is called 10,000 Small Businesses. It was started by Goldman Sachs 10 years ago. Goldman Sachs had created a program called 10,000 Women. They wanted to empower women, and out of that came 10,000 small businesses. And that's a program that exists all over the country. It's in different cities, but we also have a national cohort that comes right to Babson College in Wellesley. So if you're a business owner in a community like Acton, and you are a small business owner who wants to learn and to grow, you might say, gee, I'm interested in that program. I'd like to apply for that program. And you can self-apply. You don't have to be nominated. There's no cost to any of these programs. They're all funded by a foundation or a bank.
I was going to ask you about the funding later, but we'll get to it.
All funded by banks insurance companies, foundations, corporations, and in the case of 10,000 small businesses, or we call it 10KSB, it's for small businesses, not necessarily in inner cities, that are in underserved communities. So if anybody is watching this program and is interested in learning more about what we do, they can go to icic.org, that's icic.org, and they can look at 10,000 small businesses, the Goldman Sachs program, they can look at inner city capital connections, and they can look at a third program we have called Cultivate Small Business.
What's that about?
It was funded by Santander Bank, and that was basically an effort to identify a particular industry where if the businesses came together to learn and to grow and to get capital and training, they would be just in one business. So they chose the food business. So this year, third cohort, we've got 34 small businesses, all of which are in the food cluster, we call it. So it's really a Greater Boston food cluster initiative for small businesses in the food sector that are doing anywhere from $25,000 or $50,000 in revenue, starting out making cookies or candy in their kitchen, all the way up to businesses that are doing up to $1 million. So it's a pretty wide range. Some are very early stage, some are better developed. And all of these programs are on our website, again, icic.org, and people can look. We call them urban business initiatives, but they don't all apply to urban businesses. They are relevant to people living in communities like the one we're sitting in right now, like Acton.
So what's the catch for businesses that support this program? How do you attract funders or sponsors for your programs?
Well, more and more businesses are finding that they need to align their mission, their vision, their values with supporting communities and supporting the least among us in those communities. So naturally, a bank is out to make a profit. We know that. But when the Business Roundtable, national organization of 180 businesses nationwide, came out and made a strong statement last August, it was basically said that no longer can we simply judge a business by how much money it makes. We have to judge a business by how does it serve the community in which it works. Its customers, its communities, its suppliers. You've got to be more attentive to the community in which you live, because we're all in this together, and we got to rise and fall together. So if people go online and look at Business Roundtable last August, they'll see a very strong statement about corporate social responsibility. So that's a piece of it. Another piece of it is that banks have to adhere to something called the Community Reinvestment Act. It was passed by Congress in 1977, which means that if you're a bank, you've got to invest some resources into the community, particularly the struggling communities. So you've got to invest loans and make housing loans and small business loans. Well, if you support a program like ICIC, you get CRA credit for the program because it helps urban businesses. If you have coaches who coach the small businesses, remember, coaching is a big part of what we do.
Yes.
So if you're a banker, or you have a bank like Santander or Bank of America, and you're coaching 30 or 40 businesses in the course of a year, you get CRA credit for having done that. Also, if you're working for a bank and you know that as a small business banker, you get a chance to volunteer to help a small business owner who's struggling. And you get some personal satisfaction that you're not just making loans all day long, but you're actually going out and volunteering to help businesses to level the playing field. That's a big deal for companies. And people work for companies not just because they make a profit or because of compensation. They work for companies these days because they believe in their mission. And if your mission is more broadly defined, we support volunteerism, we support community development, we support children, we support workforce training, we support the growth and development of healthy small businesses, because if we have a nation of healthy small businesses creating jobs and creating wealth, narrowing that racial wealth gap, that speaks to the aspirations, particularly of a lot of younger people these days who are looking to work for companies whose mission they can relate to and feel good about.
In your experience, what are some of the challenges that businesses struggle with?
Well, there are a lot of challenges they face. One of the key challenges people face is how do you, in this world of where the internet is playing such a huge role in sales of your business, how do you develop an internet strategy to compete successfully with other online merchants and other online companies? If you've had a business that is traditional over the years and you've had sales force, they go out and sell a product face to face, well, fewer and fewer people want to see a salesperson. They want to go online, learn about 3 different solutions, pick a solution that is low cost, high value, good quality. You need to be able to compete in the world of the internet successfully in order to do business. And many small businesses just don't have a well-developed internet strategy. So we help put small businesses in touch with coaches who can help them develop a business strategy. A lot of companies don't even have a strategy.
That is true.
Dr. Porter would say that any business without a strategy cannot succeed and realize their full potential. Oftentimes people try to do too much. You're a small business owner, you have 2 or 3 people working for you, and you're trying to sell 8 different products. And if a coach comes in and says to you, Vivian, you're trying to sell 8 different products, but 2 of your products represent 95% of your sales. Why don't you concentrate on those 2, grow those 2, because you're doing a lot of work. The other 6 products, put them aside. Dr. Porter would say, strategy is often what you decide not to do. And a lot of people don't make those decisions. You've got to be disciplined. A lack of discipline is a key challenge that we all face in our daily lives. So you need a business strategy, you need to be disciplined, you need to understand finance. If I'm going to borrow money to grow my business, I've got to be able to come to you. Let's assume you're a banker, and I come to you and I say, Vivian, I need $200,000 for my business. And you as a banker say, well, what are you going to use the money for? Well, I'm going to use the money to grow. No, I want to know specifically what are you going to use the money for. You need to be able to tell them that I want to hire a marketing director, a salesperson. I want to add a couple of new products. I want to add 3,000 square feet to my warehouse to inventory goods and services. I mean, you've got to have a reason to borrow the money. You also have to have an ability to pay the money back. So what you need is what we call a pitch deck. You need to be able to show somebody, here's my business, here's my strategy, here's what I've been doing to this point, here's what I believe are my best opportunities for growth, here's why I need $200,000 to help me grow, or $20,000. The amount of money is not as important as the strategy. Here's how I'm going to pay that money back over the next 3 years. And for all those reasons, Ms. Banker, I would like to borrow X dollars from you. And now you look at the presentation, you look at me and you say, this is somebody who has thought about it, who has a strategy, has a marketing plan, who has good finances, good books. They're going to pay me back, they're going to pay the interest properly. And so that's much more likely to going to get you a loan. If you are turned down for a loan time after time after time, you're not going to grow. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of businesses, particularly businesses in underserved communities, particularly businesses that are owned by people of color, have a harder time getting loans than other people.
Why is that?
Than white business owners. It's just, that's the fact. There's discriminatory practices, and while we can criticize discriminatory practices, and we can say those are illegal, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, you must not do that, and we're going to hold you accountable, the fact is there is an unlevel playing field between businesses owned by people of color and businesses that are owned by people who are not of color. And we need to level that playing field. And so one of the ways you do that is by giving business, by the way, almost 70% of the businesses that go through our Inner City Capital Connections program are owned by people of color.
That's interesting.
Almost 70%. Almost 60% owned by women. And
how do you reach out to them?
Through nominating partners, women's business organizations, the Center for Women in Enterprise, WeBank, which is an acronym for a national women's business organization, chambers of commerce, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, the Asian Chamber of Commerce, the African American Chamber of Commerce, and other organizations that know something about the ecosystem, the business environment. You have to dig into the community and build relationships, because trust is a very, very important word in this discussion. If people trust that what you have to offer them can help them grow, they will believe you and potentially participate. But they often look at some other third party. They said, well, if Vivian told me that this program is a program that's good for me and it's going to help my business grow, I'm going to participate in that program. If you heard about it somewhere else or you didn't trust the person who recommended it, you might have second thoughts about participating. So that we need local nominating partners who know the business community well, and that takes time, and we go into communities. We run this program in 17 cities around the country.
Which was, you answered one of my other questions.
Yeah, we run it from Boston and Springfield and Hartford and Philadelphia and Baltimore and Washington, Chicago and Memphis, all the way out to the West Coast, from San Diego, all the way up to Portland, Oregon. So 17 cities. Last year we worked with over 1,000 companies.
That's a lot.
Small businesses. And not only that, they got the coaching for about 8 to 9 months after the program was over, after the 40 hours was finished. We assign a coach to them, all free of charge, so that they continue to be coached and advised and mentored by a reputable coach, a responsible coach, a knowledgeable coach, so that they can continue to develop their strategy and grow.
You mentioned trust in the public, and the same is true with public service. People need to have trust in their leaders so that they can participate in the socioeconomic development of any town or city. So, which brings me to the next question. Does your structure allow for collaboration with municipal governments? Essential.
Thank you for asking the question. It's essential. If you look at where we are most successful, the cities where we have been successful in attracting large numbers of small businesses that have grown and shown growth potential, growth in jobs, growth in revenue, growth in capital, it's always done better in cities when the mayor of a city and his or her economic development team are partners. And I can tell you that in places like Oakland, California, Mayor Libby Schaaf, Hartford, Connecticut, Mayor Luke Brannan, Memphis, Tennessee, Mayor Jim Strickland, just to mention 3. Right here in the city of Boston, Marty Walsh. You have mayors who have embraced the program, and their colleagues are recommending businesses, small businesses that they know of, through their Main Streets program or through different programs and initiatives that they've got going. Because we don't know intimately a city. We come in, we study the city, we do a roadmap of how to succeed, but at the end of the day, we rely on local leaders. So these, what we really call these are public-private partnerships. That's really what the heart and soul is. If the mayor is not involved, harder to make it successful. We've made it work in cities where the mayors don't necessarily embrace it or don't know about it. But if we come in for a second year or a third year, eventually the mayors wake up and they say, wow, this is a great program. We're going to participate. So in Chicago, for example, we've been 7 years in Chicago. We've helped almost 400 businesses, 399 businesses, access almost $250 million of capital. And we're seeing more and more participation from people from the public sector. Public-private partnership is the right way to go, recognizing that the nonprofit world, the for-profit world, and political leadership working together is the best way to solve problems.
All right, since I'm hosting you in Acton, if Acton wanted to be a part of your program, what would be the right steps? Or for any city for that matter, if they wanted to partner with in a city campus?
Well, again, some of the programs we run are uniquely for urban poverty. Communities which have high levels of poverty and unemployment, and they're urban in nature. So the Intercity Capital Connections is one of those. The reason I mentioned the 10,000 Small Businesses program is that that's not restricted to urban areas. They have a lot of urban companies in it, but they're looking for businesses that are under-resourced or underserved in whatever way possible. So if somebody was interested and they were here, a business owner in the town of Acton, and they wanted to participate, they should send me an email, sgrossman@icic.org. That's sgrossman@icic.org. And they can say, saw you on Vivian's show, am interested in your program or something that you're doing that might be helpful to me. Here's my name and here's my business. And they're going to get a call back from me immediately, and I might refer them to somebody within the organization. I'm a big believer that you return your phone calls and you answer your emails within 24 hours. I believe that. Look, I was in business myself. This is not something I just talk about. I was CEO of a family business that my grandfather started all the way back in 1910. He was an immigrant. He was an immigrant from Russia.
Oh, okay.
Came in 1900. Started a business when he was a teenager, an envelope business, envelope manufacturing, called Massachusetts Envelope Company. It's now called Grossman Marketing Group. And it's in business now 4 generations, 111 years and it's been in business. It's now no longer an envelope company. It's primarily a marketing, communications, and promotional products company. But I ran the business for 35 years, so I had all the challenges and the heartache and the successes and less than successes that any small business faces, because the trees don't grow into the sky. Every year isn't a better year than the year before. You hit a recession, and you can have 3, 4 bad years together, and you keep it together, and you try to keep your employees happy, and you try to compensate them appropriately. And we had a union in our company. I'm proud to say that we had a union since 1952 and never had a matter go to arbitration, never had a strike, never had a lockout.
Excellent.
It was a very, very positive relationship with the people who worked in the company. I always believed that my success was all about the people who actually worked in the company, came to work every day, whether they were union, sales, marketing, or senior executives. And so having run a business for 35 years before I got elected state treasurer, I can talk to small business owners all day long about the challenges they face and coach and mentor them in terms of the things that are maybe going wrong in their business or the things that we can help with.
Excellent. This is very interesting information, and it's also very helpful for business owners who are watching, who may be watching this program, because some don't know that there are these resources out there, and so it's very it's good to know that there is somewhere one can go if they needed some help. And I will make sure that the addresses, the links to the links are provided, website information and email, so that people can reach out to you. But before, there's a couple more questions that I wanted to ask right now. But do you know anything about Anchor Cities?
Well, Anchor
initiatives. Sorry. The Anchor initiatives. I got all this from your website.
So you asked me, do I know much about Anchor institutions? So Harvard, Northeastern, Boston University, Mass General Hospital, Leahy Clinic, just to mention 5. So these are organizations that employ a lot of people, buy a lot of stuff. They buy a lot of goods and services. And because of their procurement, because of their hiring, because of the number of people who work there, they can have a major impact on the community in which they work. Yeah. So if your goal is to create a vibrant program of supplier diversity, if your goal is to create more opportunities for business owners of color, women, people in the LGBTQ world, veterans, if you're trying to increase your procurement from groups that have been historically left behind, then you have to train them and educate them and coach them and mentor them. And every large organization measures the number of increased dollars that they're spending with women and minority-owned firms, and to a lesser extent those other categories. Anchor institutions also are very active in construction. They build buildings, they renovate buildings. They have a huge impact on the construction trades. If you think about how a hospital can build a $500 million building, or they can build a 14 building complex over a 10-year period in Boston, out near Columbia Point, which is where UMass Boston is located, they can have a tremendous impact on the community. So they're called anchors because they do anchor the economic success of a community. But they're involved in policy, hiring, construction, procurement, and all kinds of ways. And ICIC essentially created this idea of an anchor. We're doing a piece of research right now. We were just hired by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to study the behavior of for-profit anchor institutions, because they're not just eds and meds. Raytheon is an anchor institution. Procter & Gamble is an anchor institution. IBM is an anchor institution. You can think of large companies, the Fortune 1000, as anchor institutions. If you go a little bit further, all the way up to Lowell, you'll find one of the largest privately held software companies in Massachusetts called Cronus, right there in Lowell. They employ 6,000 people. They are an anchor institution. and you can have a huge impact on the community, on hiring, on the diversity of hiring, on your supply chain, by virtue of the behavior of these anchors. So anchor initiatives are initiatives that are taken to make the anchors more responsive to those challenges and those needs, particularly to narrow that wealth gap and to level the playing field and to give those who've been left out and left behind more opportunity for growth, for profitability, to serve their families, and to build strong communities.
Steve, this is amazing work that you're doing, and amazing piece of advice that you're giving everyone who is aspiring to be a business owner or who is already in business. But is there any additional word that you have out for business owners that we may have not covered, information about the ICIC program?
Well, only this. I'm an optimist. I make optimism a way of life. There were years and years and years when very little capital was flowing into underserved, under-resourced, distressed communities, often called inner cities. The business owners were struggling. Poverty and unemployment was the rule and not the exception. When there's poverty and unemployment, there is lack of nutrition. There are food deserts where literally you can't buy fresh fruits and vegetables. Now in Acton, if you want to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, it's not hard to find a place to go for anybody who lives here. It may be hard to afford them, particularly if you've lost a job,
True.
but you can find them.
Yeah.
But in the inner cities, those challenges are faced every day. So the net result is a lot of illness, poor wellness outcomes, diabetes, hypertension, low birth weight babies, all the problems that we face. And it culminates, as I said earlier in the conversation, in much lower life expectancy. And that's morally wrong, economically wrong, and that's one of the things that we all should agree on, that narrowing that gap between the life expectancy of people who live in poverty in those distressed and underserved communities and those who live in suburban communities or in neighborhoods where there's more wealth. We've got to create wealth in the hands of small business owners. And the biggest source of new jobs in America over the years are small businesses that grow and grow and grow and grow. And one last point. Immigrants have been attacked and have been vilified and have been mistreated, in my judgment, over these last few years. Immigrants are fearful. Immigrants are being deported and sent home and sent back for reasons that are not always easy to understand and aren't always, frankly, legitimate. If you look at businesses in the United States, if you look at the history of businesses in the United States since World War II, since 1945, a huge percentage of the successful, growing new businesses that have created thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs have created higher standard of living. Those businesses were started by immigrants in so many cases. The history of that over and over and over again. I believe the statistic is that 40% of the new businesses that have grown in the world of technology were started by immigrants to this country. This is a nation of immigrants, except for the native peoples who were here when the immigrants arrived. And we should make sure that we are welcoming and hospitable to those who can add value to our society, who can add value to our community, who can deliver genius, ingenuity, who are willing to go to school, be educated, be trained, and give back to the community in countless ways from countries all over the world. Hundreds of countries in every part of the world have entrepreneurship and the genius of entrepreneurship. We've got to welcome that. We can't push it away. We've got to welcome them.
Thank you, Steve, for your time. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being so welcoming, and thank you for your optimism about the future. We have a bright future as a state, as a community, and as a country if we come together and realize that those things that divide us are much less significant than those things that bring us together. And some of the things we've talked about today are things that can create economic opportunity broadly shared and prosperity broadly and widely shared. That's what we do at ICIC. That's our goal. That's what I've been doing for the past 5 years. And I know those are things you care about deeply as well, so thank you.
Absolutely. And as an immigrant originally from Uganda, I'm excited that there are people like you, leaders in the community, who are creating space for immigrants to thrive. And of course, with other minorities to thrive, and also for veterans to thrive, because that is also a group of people, a demographic that is often not given the opportunity to thrive when they reintegrate back into the community.
Yeah.
So thank you for your leadership, and we'll continue advocating for the growth of inner cities. If you want to learn more about Whitefield, visit us at whitefield.org, and you can also email me at whitefield.vivian@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. Till next time.